Hello everyone, it's me, your average bonehead, Jay. So it's come to this. A little over a year ago, I made the bold claim that Wreck-It Ralph was my favorite movie of all time, and I still stand by that. I think it's an incredibly charming movie that's a love letter to classic arcade video games, as well as having a great story with great and likable characters, an amazing villain, and one of the best morals I've ever seen in a Disney movie of how you can't change who you are, but it's best to make the most of it, knowing that there's always people who care for you. In my eyes, the movie is a near flawless masterpiece. So naturally, when it was announced a few years later that it'd be getting a sequel, I, like many, was of course really excited for this movie. Though when the trailers and ad campaigns came out for this movie, people started getting a bit skeptical due to how hyper-focused it was at imitating internet trends, especially ones that were starting to become dated, with some people claiming that it just looks like the Emoji Movie. But I wasn't as skeptical, because come on, it's Disney. They're not gonna mess something like this up. You're all just being paranoid for no reason. The movie came out, I watched it, and let's just say there's a reason why one of the running jokes of the internet is there is no Wreck-It Ralph sequel in the walls of Ba Sing Se. Ralph Breaks the Internet is an abysmal movie. It is shocking at how it manages to fail as both a sequel to Wreck-It Ralph and as a movie on its own terms. With a nonsensical story, horrible unlikable characters, a single good message that they have to ham-fist to you so you forget the toxic ones they're teaching you, and a ludicrous amount of corporate pandering that takes you out of the movie every single time. Many people have given their own 2 cents onto why this movie is terrible, and as someone who holds the original Wreck-It Ralph to the standard I do, I think it makes sense though for me to give my 2 cents on the whole situation. So sit back as, and I can't believe I'm saying this, I finally take a look at Ralph Breaks the Internet. So surprisingly, the beginning of the movie is actually kind of okay. There's nothing inherently wrong with what's going on. It's just Ralph and Vanellope messing around for a bit while the arcade is closed, which honestly, yeah, it does kind of seem like a natural progression of what would happen to them after the last movie. Though, one thing to note is that there are little problems, little inconsistencies. Like, for one, it sucks that the movie doesn't open up with the whole press start thing from the first one. It's weird that Game Central Station is dark and barren when even at night it's supposed to be bright and lively. Sugar Rush is missing one of its cabinets, Hero's Duty is nowhere to be seen, and this weird inconsistency.
For 27 years I was a total zero without any friends.
Wasn't it 30 years? Other than those problems though, it's not a bad opening. But other than that, the other main thing you should note is that this movie technically takes place 6 years after the first one. And this is what kind of leads into the base idea of Ralph and Vanellope's conflict that they will have throughout the movie. That Ralph is content with how everything is, and Vanellope kind of wants more out of life. Which, honestly, once again, is not a bad idea on paper. After the life Ralph lived for 30 years, it kind of makes sense that now that he finally has achieved the respect and happiness he's always yearned for, he kind of has no reason to want more. Who Vanellope, while yes, she also was trying to get respect and to be seen as a racer, is still young and naive, and would naturally still be curious of other things. It's not a bad idea. The problem is literally everything else. For as you see, while I did compliment the time skip at first, it's actually more of a curse than it is a blessing, as this time skip will lead to many character and world inconsistencies. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. One day, Litwack, who they changed his first name for some reason from Stan to Del, I prefer Stan, plugs in an internet router into the arcade. And we get, yeah, okay, I'll admit it, an actually funny joke.
Wifey? Well, it's either wiffle ball or an arranged marriage game.
It's actually pronounced Wi-Fi, Ralph.
Yeah, that's what I said.
I do kind of wish they made more of a joke over the fact that Sonic knew what the internet was. But on top of that, the Surge Protector states that no one should go into the internet because it is new. Not because, it's the internet and they're arcade characters, but just because they should fear it because for some reason he doesn't know what it is. How do these people handle when a new arcade game gets plugged in? But that's besides the point. Currently though, Vanellope is upset due to the fact that Sugar Rush is kinda getting boring for her, as it's basically the same track every time with no changes. Even though technically speaking, shouldn't it always be different to her since she's a playable character? It'll always be different depending on who's playing, especially if they selected her. But the point is, Vanellope wants something new. But then Ralph, who for some reason can't comprehend the idea of them disagreeing about something, him being content and her wanting more, goes and makes Vanellope a new track, while the arcade is opened. Yes, from this point forward, this movie will happily take every rule and plot point from the first movie and kindly slap it across the face. Speak of the devil, the Sugar Rush Racers, who for some reason all regressed after the first movie, as they are now back to being jerks and not really liking Vanellope that much. Even down to Taffeta mocking the fact that she's a princess. Wasn't the whole point of Vanellope changing her role from princess to president, who says she could be seen as closer to these guys, more aligned with them, and they were all more accepting of her now, and wanting to start over and become her friends? You're telling me after 6 years, these guys never went on any wacky adventures that made them grow closer as a group and become nicer people? You see why this time skip doesn't make any sense? But anyways, ignoring that glaring inconsistency, because by God you have to, the players are racing using Vanellope, and I guess the writers forgot there's a difference between active players and a task, because for some reason the movie thinks that any two players would play the exact same. It also forgot that little detail that Vanellope's glitching is on command by the player. But anyways, right before she gets to the finish line, she ends up seeing that Ralph had made her a new track. And for some reason, Vanellope goes against the wishes of her player and tries driving on the track, which causes the player to end up having to fight for control against Vanellope, which causes the steering wheel for Sugar Rush to snap right off. And thus, when it comes to the quality of this movie, it's all downhill from here. Litwack tries to force the wheel back on, which breaks it even more. I thought someone with his knowledge of games would know how to actually fix this properly. Like, I'm pretty sure you need tools to fix this. And for some reason, the company that made Sugar Rush has gone out of business years ago, and even though the kids were able to find a steering wheel on eBay, apparently $200 is more than what Sugar Rush makes in a year. I'm no expert on arcades or anything. I don't think an arcade can be sustainable if one of your most popular games doesn't even make $200 in a year. So Sugar Rush is put out of order and unplugged. Everyone manages to escape, and because of Ralph and Vanellope, all of these innocent characters are now gameless. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say because of Ralph and Vanellope? I meant to say because of Ralph. This is where the problems really start. One of the biggest flaws of this movie is how it never puts fault on Vanellope for anything. And this is our first example of it. The movie wants to say that it was Ralph's fault for Sugar Rush being unplugged. And while yes, he did go against basically everything he learned in the first movie, Vanellope is also to blame here. She went against the commands of the player and raced on the track, which led to the wheel being broken. If anything, Vanellope's more to blame. But the movie does not want to say that, which brings me to another problem. Vanellope is the worst in this movie. Everyone goes on about Ralph's character assassination, of how he's now for some reason a blithering brain-dead idiot. Which, yes, this is true. Ralph is not the same character he was in the first one. He, for some reason, is incredibly insecure and treats Vanellope as his only friend, which completely contradicts what we saw in the first movie. And yes, technically Ralph has to learn this is not okay, but Ralph in the first one did not need to learn this message. But we'll get more into that later. Vanellope, on the other hand, will consistently do actions that should be seen as bad, as horrible actions, that go against her character, the rules of the world, and just basic decency. But for some reason, the movie wants to present this as okay, just because she's Vanellope. I have no idea what was going on behind the scenes of this movie, but a weird pattern I notice is that every major female character in this movie are basically allowed to say and get away with basically anything without any form of consequence, yet every major male character is portrayed as either incompetent or shady. Like I said, I have no idea what was going on behind the scenes to make this happen, and I really don't want to get into anyone's political views. That is not what this channel is for. But it is something I notice, and it does leave me scratching my head over why this decision was made. But my point is, what they turned Vanellope into in this movie is absolutely horrible, and we will see more of it as it goes on. So later that night, Vanellope is looking at her unplugged game, and Ralph, being her best friend for 6 years, will know to come at this gently as to try and help her feel better and to help her see that things can be better.
I'm thinking we make a fort up here, or like a yurt. Or we could take these pillows, if we stack them right, we can make an igloo out of pillows.
Or he'll just come with the emotional intelligence of a brick. Yeah, I literally just stated this, but once again, Ralph, for some reason, is just a brain-dead idiot throughout this movie. And I have no idea why. That is in no way how he acted in the first one. He of all people should know how Vanellope is feeling right now. But for the story to happen, he's written like he doesn't understand this. We also get this line from Vanellope.
But I loved my game.
Oh, come on. You were just bellyaching about the tracks being too easy.
No, that doesn't mean I didn't love it.
Considering what happens later in this movie, I call BS. Anyways, now we get to my one actual legitimate compliment that I think this movie did well. Felix and Calhoun. I adore how wholesome their relationship is presented in this movie. It feels like the most natural progression these two would have. And I also do like the subplot of them adopting the Sugar Rush racers. Even though the racers technically don't need to be adopted and just need to be looked after, I do like the idea of them taking care of these rowdy kids and helping them become nicer people, even though they should be nicer people by now, but that's besides the point. All I'm saying is I can't wait to see more of this subplot unfold throughout the movie. We then see Ralph at Tapper's as he's waiting for Vanellope, because for some reason he can't comprehend the fact that she was sad that her game was unplugged, and that she needed some time to herself to process this. Alright, now I'm starting to get upset. Felix shows up, and we get the bar for this movie's comedy.
Yeah, boy.
Yeah, boy.
Boy. Say it again.
Yeah, boy.
Yeah, boy.
Yeah, boy.
boy. Yeah.
As they realize the only way they'll be able to get a new steering wheel is to go to eBay. So Ralph goes to get Vanellope, and they head off into the router so they can get to the internet. And they were gone for 24 hours, and once again the movie never chooses to explain how Fix-It Felix Jr. was running without Ralph there. We get another half-decent joke.
The internet is not nearly as impressive as how Sonic described it.
And then Ralph and Vanellope find their way into the internet, and thus the corporate pandering begins. Because oh my god guys, they have Snapchat, and look, Amazon, and that place. Yeah, the subtlety of classic video game characters just being people in their world is non-existent when it comes to the real-world websites and apps featured in the internet in this movie. The amount of product placement in this movie is surprising and very, very frequent. This isn't really a problem in the first movie because it spends most of its time in Sugar Rush, away from other video game franchises, so it has no choice but to actually tell a competent story. This movie is going to continuously distract you with the amount of brands it got in here, so it doesn't have to try as hard. Hence why the internet is portrayed as a nearly perfect, brightly lit, clean utopia all the time, with no strings attached, despite the fact that anyone with half a brain can tell you that that is in no way an accurate representation of the internet at all. So they head to a search engine named Knowsmore, and to be completely fair, I don't hate most of the characters they meet in the internet. I actually like Knowsmore and Spamly, and I even like Yes and Maybe despite loathing their names. The problem is, while they are technically important to the story, they're not really in the movie for that long, and Knowsmore, Spamly, and Maybe disappear, and Maybe doesn't even come back. The characters of the internet that are important though, however, I don't really have nice things to say about them, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Vanellope manages to find a steering wheel using Knowsmore's search engine, because remember, they have to make the literal cesspool that is the internet look as clean and welcoming as possible for this movie. They head off to eBay, where we get to see more of the internet, and oh my god guys, Facebook! Look, it's Facebook! Oh my god guys, YouTube, the site I'm on! Look, Twitter! Don't you see how realistic it is that none of these birds are doxing each other for stupid reasons? And Ralph thinks Google is where you get goggles from. Oh, that's a knee slapper. And then they make it to eBay, where the movie casually chooses to remember, oh yeah, they're video game characters, as they think it's a game to get the wheel. And despite that, I still don't know how they don't know how auctions and money work. Like, because they're idiots, they drive the price up to $27,001, and for some reason they didn't know they actually had to pay for that item. Like, don't you think it would have made more sense if the wheel was already like at $10,000, which would explain why Litwack couldn't afford it, and they still do a bidding war, but they actually know what bidding is, and when they get to the checkout, Vanellope tries using her Sugar Rush gold coins, and then that's when they learn that they need real world money to pay for this. Like, I'm okay with them not knowing they needed real world money, but it just feels weird that they wouldn't know they needed money in general. So yeah, because they're idiots, they now only have 24 hours to make the $27,001 that they need to pay for the item. Ralph ends up throwing a temper tantrum and throws a sign knocking out the internet of, Classy, Ralph breaks the internet. Mwah. Actually, that, cameo does bring up a personal problem I have with this movie. I hate how frequently we see real-world humans throughout it. Because in the first one, despite their world being digital, we still got immersed into the world of Hero's Duty and Sugar Rush because of how much time we spent in them without human interference. Anyways, they go to a guy they met earlier named Spamily, as he is and has a pop-up that will let them get rich playing video games, which is a good idea for video game characters. So he takes him to their website, and then we cut back to Felix and Calhoun. We don't? That's a bit odd. You'd think now would be a good time to cut back to them during a transition of the two scenes, but okay, you do you, movie. But anyways, they get to Spamily's website, and I'm kinda concerned that this movie is just saying that if you click on a random pop-up from a guy literally named Spamily, everything will just work out and you'll get exactly what you want with no strings attached. But okay. So they're told by Spamily if they go to an online game called Slaughter Race and steal the main antagonist, Shank's car, and bring it back to him, someone in the real world will pay them a lot of money for it. So the two of them go to this game, and apparently someone's cat pissed all over the camera lens. My god, does this place look unappealing. But of course, due to it being more actiony and extreme, Vanellope loves this place. They figure out where Shank's car is, and the two bear witness to Shank and her cronies eviscerating two players. Now, I do like this aversion that Shank's gang aren't actually inherently bad people. It kinda makes sense considering what we know of the Wreck-It Ralph world. But these guys are horrendously underdeveloped, but unlike Sugar Rush Racers, they don't even have bios or interesting designs. So there is no way to care about them or even remember their names. The only one that I still remember is their leader, Shank. And that's because I loathe her. She is absolutely one of my least favorite parts of this entire movie. For one, she says this:
Imagine a game without challenges. The same predictable thing every single time?
Lady, you're an MMO boss fight. Anytime someone triggers your event, it's going to be the same thing because you are programmed to follow those routes. Did they forget that they're video game characters? And second is how it leads into my problems with Vanellope in this movie. Shank is literally, and I can't believe I have to use this word, a Mary Sue. Shank is literally everything Vanellope wants in a friend. She's just like her in almost every way. She always listens to her. She basically never disagrees with Vanellope and always has the correct advice to give her. Now, if Shank was a twist villain, this would be interesting. Or if Shank wasn't a twist villain, but ended up telling Vanellope something she didn't want to hear that she needed to about where she truly belongs, that would be fine. But because Shank feeds into all of Vanellope's problems in this movie, and it's portrayed as a good thing, I cannot stand this character. But anyways, back to the plot. They devise a plan to steal Shank's car, and they almost managed to get away, because Vanellope was doing all the work, while Ralph was just screaming like an incompetent child. You're called Wreck-It Ralph. Can you wreck something that isn't my patience? Ralph tries to ask for the car, but Shank, showing no remorse for the fact that another game is in danger, explains that she can't just give it to them, even though I'm pretty sure her car would still respawn. So instead, these video game characters set up a BuzzTube account for Ralph, saying that if he makes videos, that would be an easy way to make money. And she tells him to go to BuzzTube, while of course showing off to Vanellope that she is perfect in every sense of the word. While on their way, Ralph states that he doesn't trust Shank, which, even though I don't like her, in universe, there really is no reason for Ralph not to trust her. The reasoning that the movie is giving is because he doesn't want his best friend to like someone else. I guess that's why they made it so that the racers don't like Vanellope for some reason and Ralph has no other friends. Do you see the problem? So they head to BuzzTube and meet the main algorithm there, Yes and Maybe. God, their names are horrible. And she says that Ralph's video trending did make him money. But unfortunately, it's nowhere close to being enough, and on top of that, his video is no longer trending anymore, leading to an admittedly funny visual gag.
You were, but that was 15 seconds ago. Now you're not. Thanks for stopping by, though.
Aww.
So Ralph comes up with the idea that in order to make enough money to buy the steering wheel, they'll have to make hundreds of videos of whatever is trending, because apparently that's how it works. And look guys, they even reference Fortnite. They are so hip with the kids. But before we get to Ralph doing any of those trends, please let us get a scene of Felix and Calhoun with the Sugar Rush Racers? Please? No? Okay. And then yes, we get the infamous scene of Ralph doing a bunch of trends, that half of which I don't even think were really trends. The only positive one here is Bob Ross, and even then it feels like a mockery to be in this movie. And Ralph ends up making a bunch of money through that. And yes, everyone has mentioned this before, and I feel the need to mention it too. As someone who has just gotten monetization and is still trying to figure out how this whole YouTube thing works and making it so my videos are actually seen by other people, I find it a bit insulting that this movie is teaching kids that, hey, if you make a bunch of trendy videos, you can make thousands of dollars in the span of 8 hours somehow. Don't even worry about this whole burnout thing. You don't gotta worry about it. This movie is making me very, very upset if you couldn't tell. Yes sends her pop-ups all around the internet in order to get more traction, and Vanellope gets to be a pop-up, and they ultimately decide to send her to... Remember how I said this movie is unsubtle when it comes to marketing? Well, this is the crowning jewel of that. ohmydisney.com. If the other real-world stuff was trying its best to break the immersion, this absolutely shatters it. Because all this is a giant Disney commercial for them and their brands. Because look, don't you guys love Pixar? Don't you guys love Marvel? Don't you guys love Star Wars, primarily our new sequel trilogy that is definitely good and better than those prequels we'll never mention? And oh guys, look, it's Baby Groot. Isn't he still relevant? Anyways, Vanellope ends up getting spotted by stormtroopers, First Order stormtroopers, that really should have been battle droids. They would have been literal antivirus bots. The jokes write themselves. Plus the Roger Roger jokes also write themselves.
We're independent thinkers. Roger, 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 Roger.
But once again, this is that time where they're not allowed to mention the prequels. And after running by a laundry list of Disney cameos and other cameos of brands Disney owns, she ends up hiding in the room filled with the Disney princesses. The marketable ones, obviously. Even though Vanellope's a president and not a princess, she is still technically a princess, so I don't completely hate the idea of her meeting the Disney princesses and befriending them. And I actually kind of like this scene, with the princesses questioning what type of princess Vanellope is, with them making respectable, lighthearted jabs of how weirdly dark their stories actually are. Even though, Belle, you weren't kidnapped or enslaved, can people please stop misremembering the plot of the first animated movie ever to be nominated for Best Picture? But other than that weird hiccup, this scene is fine. And as long as they don't have one of my favorite Disney princesses say a line so asinine it makes no sense for half of the Disney princesses and is hypocritical for the other half to think, then we should have no problem.
Do people assume all your problems got solved because a big strong man showed up?
Yes, what is up with that?
She is a princess!
Ah. It's good to know Eugene's sacrifice meant absolutely nothing to you. Moving on from that slap in the face to my childhood to this slap in the face to my childhood, I do like Vanellope teaching the idea of comfy clothing to the princesses, and as Rayne said earlier, the designs of the 2D ones are actually really great and translate well into 3D. Plus, I do like that the shirts have in-jokes. But at the same time, it becomes obvious why they even did this to begin with, because now whenever I look up Wreck-It Ralph merchandise, all I get are dolls of the princesses, because that's what I wanted. So yeah, because of those two things, this seems corporate and awful. But hey, at least it's a better uniting of princesses than... They end up telling Vanellope that if she wants something, she needs to sing a song about it, and Vanellope goes off to try that. I do like the detail of 3PO being the princess's butler, that makes a lot of sense. Anyways, back with Ralph, we get my favorite scene in the movie. The comments section.
Ralph's videos stink. What? So stupid. Ralph is the worst.
Oh god. Genuinely, this is the funniest scene in the movie, and it's being portrayed as a sad scene. Because Ralph gets mean comments. And they do that whole don't listen to the comments thing, you know, completely negating the fact that some comments are sometimes positive, others are negative, and others are people giving legitimate criticisms that you can take into account for when you make more videos. But no, it's just completely black and white. You either get good comments or you just get trolls that you shouldn't listen to. It's so funny how this movie doesn't understand the internet, despite being called Ralph Breaks the Internet. This is even funnier when you remember that Ralph has received so much more verbal abuse from the Nicelanders for 30 years. This should be nothing to him. But no, it's a sad scene. Seriously, what the hell is wrong with this movie? But Ralph is told that they have actually made enough money to buy the steering wheel. Yes, kids, Ralph made $30,000 in a span of 8 hours, and you can do it too. And he calls Vanellope, telling her to meet him at eBay so they can buy the steering wheel and fix Sugar Rush. And then Vanellope truly becomes a completely different character because for some reason, she doesn't want to go back to Sugar Rush. She wants to stay in Slaughter Race. She even gets a full-on song about it.
My heart's in flight and wow, it's a blast. Feels like my dreams are real at last.
Wonderfully contradicting not only Vanellope normally, but just Vanellope at the beginning of this movie.
But I loved my game.
Liar!
And this is where all my problems with Vanellope are on full display. Vanellope wants to go turbo. Turbo, the main antagonist from the first movie, and the one who they had entire lore written about of why you should never game jump, is never mentioned once in this movie. They completely pretend he never existed, so they can justify Vanellope wanting to do exactly what he did for even more selfish reasons. Vanellope wants to abandon her game, her friends, her family, and her responsibilities as the ruler of Sugar Rush just because she was bored of the routine. Which, if she goes to Slaughter Race and becomes an NPC working as a part of Shank's gang, wouldn't that mean she is now limited even more, being stuck only able to do the same exact routine every time their event happens, not allowed to go in this big open world she claims that she'll have the freedom to see? What Vanellope wants to do in this movie is horrendously selfish and completely short-sighted. But for whatever reason, the movie says this is okay. This is why Vanellope is heinous in this movie and why Shank isn't any better. So yeah, even though the song is kind of okay, I can't enjoy it when all I'm thinking about is how it's basically saying, yes everybody, run away from home. Go do whatever you want, ignoring your responsibilities, your friends, and your family. You don't even need to tell them you're leaving, you can just do it, as long as it makes you happy. Completely contradicting the mature and important message from the first one of, you just have to accept that you can't change your life all the time. But maybe, just maybe, if you stick around enough, you will always know there are people out there who care about you. So you might as well make the most of it. We are not done this movie yet, but right there is this movie's biggest flaw. It all comes back down to how they chose to write Vanellope. They turned a character who I praise as one of the best written child characters in a movie into one of the most heinous people I've ever seen that we are for some reason supposed to root for. We are supposed to agree with all of these actions. No, and I know I shouldn't speak for everyone, but I will. We do not agree. This message is horrible. Let's finish this damn movie. So when Ralph overhears that Vanellope does not want to go back to Sugar Rush, her friends, or Ralph, he naturally feels betrayed. Don't worry, the movie is saying it's wrong that he's feeling betrayed, that his best friend wants nothing to do with him. Wait a minute. And Ralph just assumes Vanellope is brainwashed. So he and Spamley go down to the dark web and get a virus that will make the game quote-unquote boring. So Vanellope will come back to him. But because Ralph's an idiot, he ends up letting the virus almost destroy all of Slaughter Race, which, while yes, it wouldn't hurt anyone in the game, it does cause the servers to have to reset, which would have killed Vanellope. Spamley explains this to Ralph, only for Shank to then explain this to Vanellope, so which one was pointless? Who am I kidding? Everything in this movie is pointless. And Ralph manages to save her. Unfortunately, he lets it slip that it was kind of his fault that there was a virus put into the game, and Vanellope calls him out on this. But the problem is, at the same time, you're also thinking, though Vanellope, you're kind of the reason why any of this happened. This is one of the few times where someone calls out Vanellope, i.e. Ralph, but the movie wants to say Ralph is still in the wrong and Vanellope is still in the right. So her being called out by him is null and void, and she takes the medal that she made for him in the first one and throws it away. It is actually adorable seeing how this is trying to be the cart scene from the first one, and they are just fumbling it every step of the way. To the point where this is actually one of my least favorite scenes in the movie. And apparently Vanellope hating Ralph now because she chose to be selfish for no reason means Ralph is 100% insecure, and the virus ends up copying that quote-unquote insecurity. And Should I even bother hoping for a Felix and Calhoun scene at this point? Why even bother? Ralph finds the broken medal, and I'm just remembering that the whole point was that it was symbolism. Vanellope got a card from Ralph, and Ralph got a medal from Vanellope, and they don't even mention Vanellope's cart in this entire movie. But that doesn't matter. None of it matters anymore. Ralph ends up encountering something that we don't see what it is yet, and then we see Vanellope aside, and it turns out it's a copy of Ralph. And all of them want Vanellope, to the point where there's so many of them, and they're literally breaking the internet. Hardy har har. Har 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 har. They regroup at Nosemore's stand, and he ends up telling them the only way they can get rid of all the viruses is by leading them through the gate in the antivirus district. So with the help of Yes, I'm assuming maybe died off camera during this whole debacle, they end up having Vanellope lead the Ralph clones to the antivirus district. Of course, since this is a dumb movie made for dumb babies because they are dumb, the movie feels the need to tell us what Ralph is feeling.
Wow. From up here, I can see how I do come across as needy and clingy and self-destructive, like Nosemore said.
You know, unlike that other movie that was able to get across that just with the music and visuals, because this movie is for dumb people who are dumb. The Ralph clones end up stopping them from being able to get to the antivirus district, and they all form together to make a giant monsters Ralph. I hate how well animated this is. Why did it have to be in this movie? Ralph ends up fighting the thing, of course he fails at doing so, but they ultimately end up defeating the thing once Ralph finally tells it that they can't hound over Vanellope all the time. Decent message, absolutely horrendous execution. The Ralph monster disappears, causing Ralph to fall down. I'm pretty sure he could survive that fall, he's programmed to. The one problem with what was going on in the first one is he isn't programmed to handle incineration. And Spamley tries to save him, proving his uselessness, and the Disney princesses just happen to be there in their comfy clothes and save Ralph, because of course they do. Oh, and they make sure Rapunzel gets a reprise of that accursed line from earlier.
It's a big, strong man in need of rescuing.
Why do you do this to me, movie? And again, as I alluded to earlier, the movie ends with Vanellope abandoning her friends, family, her home, and her responsibilities as the president of Sugar Rush so she can live as an NPC in an MMO game that she's only been in for a few hours, completely giving the ultimate middle finger salute to the first movie's message. A bit later, Ralph is now back at the arcade. They don't explain how he did that. Sugar Rush has its wheel without its leader, so it'll probably be in complete disarray in a few days tops. All the Sugar Rush racers have been lobotomized of their true personalities, and we just have to accept that we were never going to get any of Felix and Calhoun in this movie because it hates fun. And Ralph and Felix go off to do their job as the movie pretends that Felix had anything to do with the plot of this movie, and that Ralph was supposed to learn something in this movie, and that Vanellope was a good person. And the movie ends on that note after giving us a rickroll that was out of sync to the music. I hate this movie so goddamn much. This movie is awful. Absolutely abysmal. It fails as both a sequel to Wreck-It Ralph and as a standalone movie. The story is nonsensical, the world is undefined and uninteresting, the returning characters are bastardizations of themselves, the new characters are either A, undefined, or B, enablers to this movie's horrible messaging. The movie's messaging is horrible, it has to consistently ham-fist one message to try and make you all be distracted of the bad messages it consistently presents. The humor is not funny and was dated the second it was pitched, and is so heartlessly corporate, it is not fun to watch. But there is one good thing. It did make me appreciate the first one a whole lot better. Yeah, the first one wasn't my favorite movie of all time until this one showed me how bad it could have been. I gained a whole new appreciation for the first one. But that's just a backhanded compliment because this movie started Disney's losing streak. Did you ever notice that after Ralph Breaks the Internet, Disney has made only one good movie? At the time of recording this, we'll see how this one turns out. All the others were just mediocre at best, and that's not even counting the live-action remakes, which are all bad. To quote Shay Phyllis's review of this movie, Disney is too big to fail, so they don't need to try. I'm paraphrasing that, but still, you get the idea. They don't need to try. This movie was proof of it. Granted, I am very happy Spider-Verse came in, humbled this movie, but it didn't humble Disney. And I wouldn't be saying any of this if it wasn't for the fact that I cared. I love the movies that Disney makes, but I also love it when they're good and they try to be good. That's why I love the first one so much. But because of this movie, I have lost faith. Hell, the same thing could be said about Pixar. Incredibles 2 was also absolutely horrible, and now I'm scared that they'll ruin my second favorite movie of all time. But at the end of the day, I can only wish that things could get better. But before we go, I want to actually end things on a positive note. This movie may be absolutely awful, but it did inspire people. Inspired people to make things that were better than what we were given. Whether it be continuations of the story that give new life and context to existing characters, or add-ons to the movie giving it a proper climax and a better message, or just doing their own story in general to see if they can make a better sequel. I mean, there's even a rewrite out there by yours truly. Granted, these are all fan fictions, but to me, these all read like better sequels to Wreck-It Ralph than the actual sequel we got, and I highly recommend them all. And if you want something more official, these books are also really good too. So yeah, I think that's a pretty positive note to end things on. I don't recommend this movie at all, but I highly recommend these fan fictions, which to me are the true sequels to Wreck-It Ralph. Links to them in the description below. Now, I'm your average bonehead Jay, and I wish you all good night.